with those increased costs. And that's why.
So you think it's essentially a political choice that Rishi Sunak made about what he was going to do, and he did do some things yesterday, but he didn't even mention benefits or pensions, and we all know the fact that pensions and benefits are going up by 3.7% this year. Inflation is already 6.2. It's going to go higher. So you presumably think he made the wrong political choices, let alone the economic ones.
So chancellors have to make difficult decisions of who to tax and who to shield. So, for example, the chancellor could have chosen yesterday to introduce a windfall tax on the North Sea oil and gas companies who are making huge profits at the moment. You'll remember that the chief executive of BP said that his company has got more money than they know what to do with at the moment. I don't think many of your listeners are in such a position. Certainly my constituents would love to have that problem of having more money than you know what to do with. And so we've said a one-off windfall tax on those companies and use all of the revenues from that to push down bills for everybody else, take VAT off domestic gas and electricity bills and expand the warm homes discount, because the people who are struggling most are families and pensioners as well. In fact, in some ways, especially pensioners, because they're at home more and they need warmer homes. Use that money to expand the warm homes discount and to help them through these incredibly difficult and unprecedented times.
I did put that argument to Rishi Sunak yesterday, and I mean, he fought back against it, saying, well, if you put a windfall tax on a particular sector, it very rarely works. Can you give me an example of a sector where that's happened and it has worked? Because I think back to Gordon Brown putting a windfall tax on the pension sector in '97, and that did not work. I mean, it might be an exaggeration to say it ruined a world-leading pensions industry, but it didn't do what it set out to do.
Well, if you look at 1997, the windfall tax that Labour introduced then was on the privatised utilities and used that money to fund a massive scheme to get young people back into work, because you'll remember in the 1990s we had really high levels of youth unemployment. But on this North Sea oil and gas windfall tax, that has been done before. George Osborne did it when he was Chancellor, and Gordon Brown did it when he was Chancellor, on occasions when the profits, because of the prices of oil and gas, were particularly high. George Osborne used it to fund the fuel duty freeze when he first became Chancellor.
So this has been used before. Isn't that a disincentive then for oil companies? Because, I mean, let's face it, with the current energy crisis, we're probably going to need energy companies to invest more in the North Sea. I mean, we can have a discussion about climate change, but I think that's what's going to happen. If you impose some sort of windfall tax like this, they're less likely to want to do it.
So investment decisions are made years in advance based on what you think is going to happen to prices. Nobody thought that prices were going to go this high. You're not going to make investment decisions on the wing and a prayer that prices are going to go to these unprecedented levels. But also, when BP and Shell, for example, announced these big profits back in February, at the same time, they announced big increases in the dividend payments and also share buyback schemes to further inflate their prices, as well as big bonuses for their executives.
But they had lost a lot of money the year before, hadn't they?
But this is a tax on the money that they have raised, and when they're not making money, they don't pay so much taxes. This is a one-off tax to reflect the fact that they are doing incredibly well because of those high prices. And interestingly, the former chief executive of BP said that he thought that this tax was justified. That is a choice the Chancellor could have made. It's a choice that I would have made if I was Chancellor.
OK, well, there's so many more topics to discuss. I'm going to leave that to our listeners to put to you. 0345 6060 973. We've got a full switchboard of calls, so if you don't get through first time, do keep trying. It's 17 minutes past 7.
LBC. Ian Dale on LBC.
It's 7:20 on LBC. We have the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, with us. Julia Arthur on Twitter says, love Ian's tie. Thank you very much. I thought I'd make a bit of an effort, you know. Rachel Reeves did a cracking job yesterday in Parliament, gave Sunak the willies, I thought.
Thank you, Julie.
Well, I wouldn't thank her if I were. Right, let's go on to a first question. It's Andrew in Woodford. Hello, Andrew.
Yes, good evening. I'd like to know exactly what measures would Labour take to put money into the pocket, directly into the pockets of the people that cannot afford these rises that are going forward, to directly help them, as opposed to what has already been said by Rishi Sunak about future measures. We need the money now. We need help right now. What would Labour do right now to provide this help?
Okay, 3 things that if you had been giving that statement yesterday, you would have done to put money in Andrew's pocket.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for your question. The first thing is that we would have done a windfall tax on the big profits that North Sea oil and gas companies are making. And we would use that money to do 2 things. First of all, to take VAT off domestic gas and electricity bills so that you wouldn't pay VAT money to the tax man when you pay your gas and electricity bill. But also for the people who are on more modest incomes and low incomes, we would expand the Warm Homes discount. At the moment, the Warm Homes discount is worth £140 for people that get it. We would raise that to £400, and we would expand it from the just under 3 million households that get it today to 9 million households, to give people the support they need with the huge increases in bills. And that would mean up to £600 for families and pensioners that need it most. And the final thing...
How much would that cost, though? I mean, in terms of the government spending?
Well, it costs about the same amount as the package that the Chancellor announced, but it's not a loan. It would actually be money in your pockets. The Chancellor's scheme is, as you know, a buy now, pay later scheme that you get £200 off your bills, but then you have to pay it back into it for years to come. And we can do that because we would do the windfall tax, so we would raise money to put it back into people's pockets. And then the final thing, Andrew, is that we wouldn't be going ahead with the increase in national insurance contributions from April, and that would mean that people would keep more of the money that they earn, and they can use that to help with the higher prices that people are facing right now.
Andrew, does that stack up to you?
Absolutely not. It does not help me go to my work with the high petrol prices. It does not help put food on my table. It does not help in my everyday movements, my everyday expenses. These are future things. But
no, this is what we would do right now.
In the meantime, we have raising inflation. Everyday prices are going up. You're talking of big ideas of windfall taxes, which does not help the immediate problem. And this is something I found with, in general, with politics. You talk about things that will happen in the future. How am I supposed to put food on my table right now?
This is what we would do right now. I've been saying since the beginning of the year that the Chancellor should do this. This is what I would be doing if I was Chancellor right now, to ensure that people have up to £600 to help them with these higher prices, and not going ahead with the increase in NICs, which is due to take place in less than 2 weeks' time, would mean that you could keep more of the money that you earn. So this is immediate practical help that we would fund through that tax on the North Sea oil and gas companies.
When would that money come in, though? Because you can't just say, right, today we're going to impose a windfall tax of $3 billion, and then the money comes in the next day. That would take quite a few months to come in, wouldn't it?
We can make the changes, though, to the VAT. You could do that immediately, and you could expand the Warm Homes discount. And we think we could raise more than £3 billion with the windfall tax.
Andrew, thank you. Let's go to a text from Tim in Balham, who says, why does Rachel think think this is the right time to tax the oil and gas companies, especially with the potential fuel crisis caused by the war in Ukraine? Well, you've kind of answered part of that already.
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Tim. The reason why I think that there should be a windfall tax on these companies is that they are earning huge profits, excess profits, based on the fact that the global price of oil and gas is going up. It's not costing these companies any more money to extract the oil and the gas, but they are earning extra money because the global price is so high. And chancellors have to make decisions about who to tax and who to shield. This government are making a choice to increase taxes on ordinary working people by freezing the personal tax allowance and by increasing national insurance contributions. That's their choice. I would make different choices. And one choice that I would make would be to tax these companies who are making such big profits right now and use that money to do what I think is the most important thing right now, and that is to help ordinary people, families and pensioners with these huge bills that they're facing. I mean, the scale of the challenge is extraordinary. On average, bills will be going up by nearly £700 in just 5 or 6 days' time. For many people, that is utterly unmanageable.
Interesting text from Ros here, who says in 2008, the cost of crude oil crept up to $130 a barrel, more than what it is now. However, the cost at the pumps was around £1.10. That doesn't really stack up, does it? I mean, why would it? We're looking at 180, 190. Diesel did go over £2 at one point in some places. Why is this happening? Why are the prices so high now?
I mean, that is a really good question, Ross. And I think more pressure does need to be put on the petrol companies and the forecourts to reflect the prices, because it's when the global prices of oil go up, they're very quick to raise the prices, but then they don't tend to fall again. And so these higher prices, even when the price falls back, get sort of baked in for consumers. And so I do think there needs to be more pressure, more competition in the market so that people actually benefit when prices fall. Now, prices are really high at the moment, but they will fall back again. It's important that consumers get that.
Let's go to James in Gillingham. James, hello.
Hello there, Ian. Good evening to both of you. Good evening, Rachel. I'm just ringing. I'm a small business owner. I have been for about 30 years. And I was one of the small businesses that received no support at all from the government during the pandemic, along with freelancers. And it was a national disgrace, to be honest. Millions of us, tax-paying people. And to be honest, Rachel, the Labour has shown no support for us at all, apart from a couple of mentions by Keir Starmer in the House of Commons. I'd like to know from you what you would plan on doing to support us, and whether you're going to support us here and now as well, because we are potential voters, millions of us, who are completely disillusioned with the Conservative Party now. That's my question.
Well, it's great to talk to you, James. Can I ask James what his business is and what he does? Is that allowed, Ian?
Of course it is.
James, what do you do? What is your business?
I sell antique prints and picture frames at retail shows. And can I just very briefly, everything was closed because of the pandemic, no shows. I take part at shows throughout the year and always paid my tax and received not one penny. I'm a limited company, and we were seen as being frauds and told that we were frauds, and all the rubbish that went with that. So that's it, really, yeah.
Yeah. I was speaking to my cousin recently who works in events, and she was also one of the 3 million people excluded from support because she was a freelancer and her earnings, went up and down, and she also had a baby just before the pandemic, and so her earnings were not at the level to get the support. So I know a lot of people in your situation, James. We argued at the time that support should be extended, that more people should
what would you do now, though? Because James is complaining that you and Keir Starmer haven't been saying a lot about your support for small businesses. If you were in government now, what would you be doing differently to what the government actually is doing?
Yes, I think that during the pandemic, we were calling out, James, the inequities and the unfairness that you and the other 3 million people excluded from support were facing. And in my team, in the Shadow Treasury team, Shadow Minister James Murray has also been raising this with the government at Treasury questions, etc. So I think we have been doing it, but maybe we need to do that louder and speak up for you. Now, I wanted to know what you did, because I wanted to see whether some of the other things we've spoken about would help you, James. One of the things that we've said is that we would reform business rates, because at the moment business rates work against small businesses and particularly high street businesses. I don't think because of the business you're in, James, that would directly benefit you, but cancelling the NICS increase might help you. But for small businesses in general, I want to reform the way that business rates work, because at the moment, if you're a small business, you're a high street business, before you make a penny in turnover, let alone a penny in profit, you have to pay business rates. And your main competitor might be a multinational online giant who doesn't pay anything like the business rates because they don't have a high street presence, and they might not even be paying corporation tax in this country because they're registered overseas. So I want to see a reform of our business rates system to help smaller businesses and high street businesses thrive.
James?
Really briefly, yeah, well, thanks, Rachel, for that. But as you've said yourself, a lot of businesses don't pay. I don't pay business rates because I work from home. But you know, it was. I know that you're saying it was, but it was a shocking state of affairs. You know, people took their lives because of this. I think 30 known suicides as a result of this, left notes, and it was absolutely disgusting, this whole thing. And I think Labour really needs to, I don't mean tap on it in a vulgar way, but there are a lot of very disillusioned ex-Tory voters there who need to know that there's a party there who cares about us. And I think your party need to show that. Sorry, getting a bit emotional here, but you
yeah, I can understand, James. You've been through a really tough time, and you know, I hope that we did call out the government. I'm sorry we couldn't get them to expand the support for you and the 3 million people in your situation. I hope that now that things are back open and back up and running, you can go and do your shows and sell your antiques, and I hope you're finding a good market there. But I know as well you're probably struggling as people are finding they've got less money in their pockets with the cost of living crisis.
OK, James, thank you very much. More from Rachel Reeves, more from you in just a moment. You're listening to Ian Dale on LBC. It's 7:33, news headlines with Lottie Morley.
The Shadow Chancellor has told LBC the cost of living crisis is a huge concern for people across the UK. Rachel Reeves says her constituents have already been affected.
You know, I've got mums who are telling me that they're skipping meals so that they can provide properly for their kids. Pensioners saying, I'm not turning the heating on because I'm worried about how I'm going to pay the bills. Parents who are both in work saying, when my kids grow out of their shoes, we just haven't got the money.
NATO countries have agreed to send more troops and lethal equipment to nations surrounding Ukraine after meeting in Brussels. The country's president had asked for tanks, but Boris Johnson said that would be logistically difficult. NATO will send jets and equipment to protect against chemical weapons. And media executive and Conservative peer Michael Grade has been named the preferred choice to be the next chair of Ofcom. He will need to appear before a committee of MPs before he can be appointed. LBC weather, cloudy with a chance of light rain in the north, clear elsewhere with a low of 2 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Ian Dale. Tweet at LBC.
7:37, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is with me taking your calls. Let's go to Mike in Reading. Hello, Mike.
Good evening. Would the Labour Party consider nationalisation to sort out the current energy crisis?
Well,
Hi, Mike.
that was Labour policy at the 2019 election, wasn't it?
We lost the 2019 election, so we've got to move on from, we're certainly not bound by what was in a previous manifesto. But I think Mike makes a fair point. Is the energy market working properly today? And the truth is, it's not. 30 companies have gone bankrupt over the last few months in the energy sector. But I guess the question I have to answer as Shadow Chancellor is, how do I get best value for money for taxpayers and also for bill payers? And I set out a set of fiscal rules that says that every pound of money spent on day-to-day expenditure should be covered by tax receipts, and that we would get debt falling as a share of GDP, because at the moment debt is at incredibly high levels. Not far off 100% of GDP. And that subject to that, we would then borrow to invest in some of the things that make our economy stronger in the future. For example, in things like carbon capture and storage, in gigafactories for electric vehicles, hydrogen, onshore and offshore wind. And I guess for me is, how do you ensure that value for money for taxpayers? And if you're going to spend money nationalising companies, it means less money for other things that you might want to do, whether that is reducing NHS waiting lists. So I'm not going to be ideological about it. I'm just going to be pragmatic and look at the public finances and look at that value for money question.
So on energy, it's basically a failure of regulation rather than just because they are in the private sector.
Well, regulation has definitely failed. I don't think there's any other country where 30 energy companies have gone bankrupt. And then who ends up picking the bill for that? It's other bill payers, because then those customers are passed on to other companies, and those costs are passed on as well. So we've got a failed energy market that needs to be put right. So I'll explain why. It's a bit like what happened in the banking sector. You've got a company that can just set up and say, Mr. Dale, would you like me to supply your gas and electricity? And I say, right, okay, I'm going to do it at this price. And then the global prices go up, and I've got a contract with you, but I can no longer get the energy at the price that I've said I would sell it to you, because I haven't hedged, they haven't got any reserves, and they were just allowed to enter the market. And then, of course, when things went wrong, they went bankrupt. So the energy market clearly isn't working. It needs to be better regulated.
But more generally, I think Mike's point is that is nationalisation still part of a Labour programme? I mean, nationalising the railways, for example. I mean, they are kind of almost nationalised at the moment, aren't they?
I mean, the route that I go up and down to Leeds every week, that is nationalised. The track is now nationalised because the model didn't work. I mean, partly because you didn't really have competition. There was one company acting on each line, and then the infrastructure was privatised, and now it's back in public ownership. And I think you've got to take things on a case-by-case basis. I think there is an argument that when other contracts come up on the rail, for example, that it shouldn't just be a default that it's a private company. If you've got the public sector running a railway well, why shouldn't they be allowed to run other railways, for example?
Quick comment from you, Mike.
Yeah, just to clarify, I replied to a couple of those points. I understand we lost as a party basically in 2000, and I can't remember, it's so long ago.
19.
We lost 19. I lost the election, but there's a big difference in our policy factor from stuff that's common sense, like making sure that we have a current and affordable energy system, where now we're in a major crisis because we can't actually provide the energy, to free Wi-Fi. There's a big difference in the policy of the Labour Party. It is common sense to me. Like, for example, Germany has a part state-owned energy service, which is part nationalised. It doesn't have to be fully nationalised. EDF, France, are they getting hammered the same we are? They're not getting.
Well, they're actually getting hammered worse because they bought all of this gas and oil from Russia, which we haven't been doing so much. So it doesn't mean that just because they're part state-owned, surely, that means they're going to make the right decisions.
I think Mike makes a fair point that you've got to look at each of these sectors on their own merits. What I would say, one of the things that has changed since 2019 is the state of the public finances and the huge pressure on public services. So I really hope in a couple of years' time to be in a position to make some of these decisions. What is the number one priority? My number one priority right now is helping those people that are drifting into poverty and reducing those NHS waiting lists. That means you've got to make difficult decisions about where to put public resources and taxpayers' money. And so I'm not going to rule anything in and out at this stage, but you've got to look at what are the top priorities for an incoming Labour government. And at the moment, with poverty levels, I think the Resolution Foundation said today that 1.3 million more people are going to be in absolute poverty in the next couple of years.
But you will need to rule things in and out fairly soon because an election isn't that far away now. And I think the electorate, given that they just didn't trust your party and particularly the leadership at the last election. Now, Keir Starmer's made a lot of progress on detoxifying the party in many ways, but it's still a bit of a policy-light party. It's still all criticism of the government, which is part of opposition. But I think people are going to expect a bit more policy substance from you, aren't they?
And we will, of course, in every area, put that detail. But it's also got to reflect the reality at the time. And at the moment, whenever the election is, if it's in 23 or 24 most likely, what is the situation going to be in our public services? What is the situation going to be?
As Linton Crosby always says, you can't fatten a pig on market day. You can't suddenly say we're going to wait till 4 weeks before the election, issue our manifesto, and you can judge us on that. People have got to understand the direction of travel, and it can't be just the sort of opposite from the last election.
No, and that is absolutely true as well. At the moment, my focus is in what would we do now to tackle the cost of living crisis, to show that we have an alternative to the government, the windfall tax, not going ahead with the NICS increase. These are the things that we would be doing now. But at the next election, we might face a different set of circumstances. But I have also, and I don't think an opposition has ever done this so far ahead of an election, set out a set of fiscal rules. So I said that all day-to-day spending would be paid for with day-to-day tax receipts. That is a big constraint on what you could do as Chancellor.
They talk about little else down the dog and duck.
But it is important because people, it's what I said at the beginning, what is the big political challenge for my party? It is to show that we can be trusted with the public finances because people, and you know, Mike, it wasn't just in 2019, we've now been rejected in 4 elections in a row. In May, it will be 12 years since Labour was last in government. All 12 years I've spent as an MP have been in opposition. I've made a difference at a constituency level, but I haven't had the chance of serving in a government, as I haven't made the difference that I want to make. So we've got to make changes as a party if we're going to have that right and win that right to govern.
What makes you think you'd be a better Chancellor than Rishi Sunak? Because you are an economist by training, aren't you? You used to work for the Bank of England. Does that give you, do you think, any sort of inbuilt advantage?
Well, I worked at the Bank of England for the best part of a decade. I also worked in the private sector in financial services for a bit as well. And I think that means that I'm qualified to do the job. I can add up, which is a good start.
That's why I couldn't do it.
Horses for courses. I can do your job. So I think I'm qualified to do the job. But I think what people want at the moment is a Chancellor that understands the scale of the challenge and is willing to rise to it, and that prioritises the right things. And, you know, I said that Chancellors do have to make difficult decisions about who to tax and who to shield. I think that the Chancellor is making the wrong choices at the moment, and he's leaving people to fend for themselves. And when you see the sorts of price rises, especially in the essentials, I mean, everybody is noticing it when you're doing the weekly shop, when you're getting those gas and electricity bills, when you're filling up the cart with petrol. But for some people, they're going to reach beyond breaking point soon.
Right, we have 13 more minutes to get your questions into Rachel Reeves. 0345 6060 973. Mike, thank you very much for yours. It's 7:47.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
As he boarded his aircraft to go to Brussels for a meeting with NATO about situations in Ukraine, I spoke with Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
I think everybody wants to go into this trying to get peace, Nick. We all want to see some solution in Ukraine.
You rightly reference Putin's barbarism. They shoot protesters in the street. They bomb maternity hospitals. They're using rape as a form of subjugation.
People talk about new red lines for chemical, biological, tactical nuclear weapons or whatever. For me, the red line already has been crossed.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Ian Dale on LBC.
7:50 on LBC. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is here taking your calls. I've got an email from Graham in Bushy, who's one of our regular For the Many podcast listeners. He says, if Keir Starmer was the PM and he received the memo to say that P&O Ferries were about to sack 800 workers, what could he have done to stop them? As I don't think there's anything legally that could have stopped these redundancies. Is there?
Well, the chief executive of P&O was at the Business Select Committee in Parliament today.
A very torrid time.
So we were just discussing it before the show started, weren't we, Ian? And Darren Jones, who's the chair of the Select Committee, I think...
who will be on the show in about an hour's time.
A little advert. But he did a pretty good job at... making the man account for himself. But he said, didn't he, that he accepted it was illegal.
He accepted he had broken the law, but it was the only way he could do it. He said otherwise the company would have folded.
Oh, come on. I mean, he could have 3 months ago. This didn't happen overnight. We've got through the pandemic, touch wood. He could have 3 months ago or more started negotiations with those working people. There is no excuse for getting security guards onto the boat and marching people off their place of work, and actually for some of them the place that they lived. If he admitted that he was breaking the law, then, you know, when that memo was received by the Prime Minister and the Transport Secretary and the Business Secretary, that they should have got an injunction, they should have stopped this. But also, we need to tighten up our laws that make it so easy just to sack people like this.
Do you think that there is a case for withdrawing their operator's licence now? I mean, you have their chief executive in Parliament admitting to breaking the law. Surely that makes them an unfit operator.
And I think Darren Jones said at the Select Committee today that, you know, the guy shouldn't be a company director. He's registered as a company director here in the UK. They're getting contracts, their owner, based in Dubai, to run free ports. I don't want them running our free ports. What are they going to do to workers there? You know, sack them and replace them with people earning less than £2 an hour. You know, we need to ensure that rogue employers like this, and I think the majority of employers and the majority of businesses actually really care about their workers and are as horrified as anyone else about this. But you've got to crack down.
Do you think their
these
operator
rogue
licence
employers.
should be withdrawn?
Well, you know, if they've broken the law and if they're going to carry on acting like this, the people at the top of the company should be out. They should not be fit and proper people to be directors of companies in this country. But also the government need to take some responsibility and get on top of the details. You know, just to overlook a memo like this when 800 people's jobs were at stake. I mean, it is unforgivable.
Apparently, the civil servants who did know about this, I think the night before, didn't even alert ministers. Now, you can say, well, the ministers should have a system in place to be alerted to this sort of thing, and they kind of went along with P&O, which I find profoundly shocking. But the Department of Transport has always been in bed with the ship owners, I'm afraid. I've a bit of experience of that.
You know, in the olden days, ministers took responsibility for what was happening in their departments. You know, Michael Heseltine resigned from his department because he took responsibility for what happened there. You know, ministers now say, no, not my fault, someone else's fault. I might have done wrong, but I'm staying in the job.
Right, let's move on to Alison in Kingston. Alison, hi, what would you like to ask?
Good evening. I've got one big question, and a follow-up to it, which is related. So, do Labour have plans to close the tax evasion, avoidance and offshore registration loopholes, which deprive the public purse of billions of pounds every year? Because you mentioned earlier that businesses which are registered elsewhere don't pay corporation tax as people who are registered in the UK do, and yet they are making money here.
OK, Rachel?
You're absolutely right to point this out, Alison, and it is a scandal what some individuals and also actually what some big businesses, including household names, get away with. I want to see a level playing field when it comes to taxation. So if we take businesses, for example, I gave the example earlier that you'll have a small business that pays business rates. If they make enough money, they pay corporation tax. But their main rival is paying less in business rates and may not even be paying corporation tax in this country because they say the intellectual property is registered overseas. I would like to see you pay taxes in the place that you do business. And there is work happening globally to make this happen. But I don't think this government is pushing it with the urgency that is needed, because it's not right that small businesses get undercut by these big global rivals. And it's not right that these big global companies are not paying into the system that funds our NHS and our schools,
Why didn't the Blair-Brown government do this? They had 12, 13 years to do it and didn't really make any inroads into this at all. George Osborne did. I think the current government haven't done as much, but George Osborne did try and close a lot of these loopholes.
I think a lot has changed in the last 12 years. So the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, they weren't such dominant parts of our economy as what they are today. You know, so much money now goes through these companies, which makes it even more imperative. I think there are other issues as well and other loopholes that need to be changed. So a couple that I've already announced that we would do would be to change the way that private equity companies are taxed. So at the moment, the bosses of private equity firms, when they pay themselves as bonuses, it's only taxed at the capital gains rate rather than income tax rate. so only taxed at 20% when it should be taxed at 40%. So there's lots of ways that you can crack down on these loopholes, but I'm absolutely determined to do so we bring in the money to fund our public services and can keep taxes lower then for ordinary working people.
Alison, I know you had another question you wanted to get to, but we've literally got less than 2 minutes left, so I want to get one other question in. Simon in Southampton is on the line. Simon, can you be brief? What's your question, please?
Okay, a country where working people have to use food banks to survive is a failure. Where does Labour stand on universal basic income?
Well, Simon,
nice, easy one to end with.
Simon, you're absolutely right that food banks are a stain on our country. When I became an MP 12 years ago, we didn't have any food banks in Leeds West, and now they're everywhere because the need has grown so much. I'm not in favour.
Do you not think the need was there already to an extent? Maybe not to the extent that it is now, but there was almost a hidden need that food banks of now that they are meeting a demand that to some extent was there anyway.
I think the austerity and the cuts to benefits, whether it was the cuts to disability benefits, the bedroom tax, the two-child rule, all of those things have put huge strain, and the fact that wages just haven't kept up with the rising cost of living. Universal basic income. Look, I think it is important that we target money at the people that need it. The problem with the universal basic income is that Ian would get it and I would get it, and I don't need it. I want to see resources targeted at those people who most need support, whether that is families, pensioners, disabled people, and I would ensure that they got the support that they needed, not people like me and Ian who don't need a universal basic income.
Can't disagree with you on that one. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for the last hour, Rachel. I think we've answered a lot of questions. There's a lot more that we could have got to. Apologies to those that we ran out of time. And I'm going to hold you to that because I think this is a really brilliant way of politicians communicating in a rather different from the 10-minute or 5-minute interview that you and I might do, where you're looking to get over 2 points, I'm looking to get you on something, and it's a bit different.
I've got to say as well, as much as I love talking to you, I think I prefer your listeners.
OK, go away. Rachel, thank you very much indeed. Always good to see you. We are going to switch our attention to Ukraine over the next hour. It's something we haven't covered on the programme this week very much at all, apart from in cross-question. So I want to talk about what's happened in Brussels, because NATO leaders are going to send more weapons to Ukraine to support the war against Russia. Do you think that the West and NATO are doing enough? Love to hear your calls. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to Ian Dale on LBC. It's 8 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, NATO countries have agreed to send more troops and lethal equipment to nations surrounding Ukraine after a meeting in Brussels. The country's president had asked for